Good Tuesday evening, everyone. I'm YNN meteorologist Ryan Finn with a look at your statewide weather forecast. Things pretty quiet here all across New York State. Definitely lots of cloud coverage you can see here on the satellite picture, but really not a whole lot in the way of precipitation. If you live around parts of central New York up towards, say, Watertown and heading over into Lewis and Jefferson County, you may find a few flurries here tonight. Also maybe a stray flurry around the capital region, and maybe even a stray flurry over towards Buffalo and off to the south and east of Buffalo. But other than that, not a whole lot going on. Still pretty windy, also pretty cold. Temperatures a bit warmer here coming up for tomorrow, as most places should reach the low to mid-30s. One exception down towards Jamestown, upper 20s to right around 30. It will still be pretty breezy, but not as breezy as it has been over the past few days. Check out the temperatures across the rest of the nation. Warmer air as you head over towards St. Louis. Believe it or not, we are going to be in the 40s as we head into Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Stay tuned. We'll have more weather right after Capital Tonight.
Tonight, a sit-down with the chairs. Leading a political organization is not an easy task. Between fundraising, recruiting candidates, and trying to avoid bruising primaries, the work of a party chairman is seemingly never-ending. Keeping your head above water is hard enough. Keeping everyone happy is pretty much impossible. 2010 provided an unusual number of challenges on both sides of the aisle. Here to look back on a roller coaster election year are the two state party chairmen, Democrat Jay Jacobs and Republican Ed Cox. That's all coming up as this special year-end edition of Capital Tonight starts right now. Good evening and welcome to this special year-end edition of Capital Tonight. I'm Liz Benjamin. So 2010 was a big election year here in New York. As is the case every 2 years, all 212 seats in the state legislature were on the block. And there was also a battle for control of the Senate, which held particular importance because of redistricting. Now add to that 29 House races at a time when the GOP was gunning to make up for its losses in 2008. Plus, there were contests for every statewide position, from governor and lieutenant governor to comptroller, state attorney general, and both the U.S. Senate seats, which is a very rare occurrence created by Hillary Clinton's mid-year departure. And that's just the general election. Both major parties had to contend with primaries this year, including a five-way attorney general fight for the Democrats and three intra-party wars for governor and two state Senate seats for, U.S. Senate seats for the GOP. Now, with so many battles on so many fronts, it was a tough time to chair a political party. Over the next half hour, we're going to be talking with two men, one a Democrat and the other a Republican, who held that title this year. We start out the evening with state GOP chairman Ed Cox. His controversial decision to push Democrat-turned-Republican Suffolk County Executive Steve Levy for governor angered some Republicans, particularly Rick Lazio, who had already declared his candidacy. Now, Cox's effort backfired, saddling the party with controversial Buffalo businessman Carl Palladino as its standard bearer. I spoke to Cox last week about the various campaigns and his strained relationship with Republican National Committee Chairman Michael Steele. Okay, thank you very much for your time tonight, Chairman. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Happy holidays to you, Liz.
And to you, and Happy New Year. So I just want to start with a relatively new development. You are backing a person who I don't know that everyone is familiar with. Her name is Maria Sino. She is, however, originally a New Yorker. And you are backing her for the chairman of the National Republican Committee Party over Michael Steele. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, Maria Sino is from New York, from Western New York. She was the executive director under Bill Paxton, who was then a congressman from Western New York during the '94 elections, which were tremendously successful for the Republican Party. We took over both houses of Congress for the first time since 1952. And then she went on to be the deputy chairman of the state party under Ed Gillespie. She's a very effective leader. She is ready to be chair, and she comes from New York State.
Well, okay, but you know, I know that there are a lot of people inside the Republican Party who aren't exactly huge fans of Michael Steele's, but you and Michael Steele in particular have not always seen eye to eye, basically on a number of things, including your support of Steve Levy to run for governor when he was a Democrat. Now he's, of course, a Republican. Is this a retaliation or some
Well,
kind of...
Liz, it's not that we don't see eye to eye. It is that Michael Steele was not helpful to us here in New York State. He had divided the party here, and he, in fact, did not contribute much to the Get Out the Vote campaign. In fact, which he traditionally the National Committee does, and the money that was spent here was not very well utilized. We had to do our own Get Out the Vote program, which indeed was very effective, focusing on Central New York, on the Hudson Valley, and on Long Island, where we had crucial races, and we had to do that on our own. He was not helpful, and that's why I'm backing someone other than him to be chair of the party.
Okay, well, to play devil's advocate, though, I mean, his supporters would say he wasn't helpful because he didn't agree with your approach in the election, and he didn't agree with your supporting of a Democrat when there was a Republican, Rick Lazio, who was already in the running.
Steve Levy registered to be a Republican. He was tremendously helpful as a Republican county executive of Suffolk County in winning, for example, the Senate seat that Lee Zeldin won. Very effective there, winning the 2 assembly seats out there. And the National Committee, by its Rule 11, is not supposed to get involved in conventions or primary campaigns, and it did against its very rules. So he should not have done the things that he did. It was not helpful to us here in New York State. It was counterproductive.
Okay, you know, the leaders of the Assembly and the Senate, now we're talking about Brian Kolb and now newly minted Majority Leader Dean Skelos, have suggested that they didn't receive an enormous amount of support from the state party, that they did a lot on their own. I'm just curious if you could tell us exactly what it was that you did.
Let me stop you right there. That was Dean Skelos did not say that. Brian Kolb did indicate something along those lines in a quick interview that he did, but he was talking about funding for the Assembly, and we did try and help him, but it was very hard to. We did help on the funding side, the State Senate Committee. We raised several $100,000 for them. And, of course, our Get Out the Vote program, which was really very extensive, focused in the place where their Senate seats, helped win several of the very crucial Senate seats, and Dean understands that, and we had a very good working relationship throughout the campaign.
I'm sorry, Chairman, what do you mean it was difficult to help the Assembly minority? I mean, they actually, just for a second, they're still waiting.
I'm talking about fundraising, Liz. That's what he was addressing.
I see.
And that was difficult for him, and we tried to help on that score, but people wanted to give to the Senate campaigns or to the congressional campaigns or to the state party. That's what I was addressing.
Okay, but in terms of giving them support for Get Out the Vote or maybe for their mail?
I emphasized right from the start the need for our county chairs, for the state committee, to focus on winning assembly seats. That's the way we fill up our bench, and we paid attention to doing a Get Out the Vote effort, where not only were there congressional seats overlapping with Senate seats, but were there assembly seats also. And I think that Get Out the Vote effort, which Brian Kolb has said publicly, was very effective in helping win. And, you know, we have 17 new members of the Assembly, of which at least 8 were pickups from Democratic seats, maybe 9, depending what happens in the Kerwin race.
You know, looking back on the campaign, though, after the elections were all over and the dust had settled from Carl Palladino and Steve Levy, and before that Rick Lazio, you know, people criticized you, actually, and said that you had not managed that correctly. Of course, you ended up with a guy, Carl Palladino, who was pretty controversial, and he was not your first pick. Do you have regrets about the way it turned out?
I don't have any regrets at all. Steve Levy would have been a tremendous candidate. I think I've had a number of people come up to me, and I think the growing consensus is he would have been by far the better candidate to take on Andrew Cuomo. In fact, I just saw Elliot Spitzer this morning by chance, and he said, you know, Steve Levy would have beaten Andrew Cuomo. I think he certainly would have given a very, very good race, and that would have been very good for our down ballot candidates.
The idea that you and Elliot Spitzer agree on something, I find a little bit surprising.
Well, he expressed that opinion very, very quickly, and I think a lot of others agree, Democrats and Republicans, that Steve Levy would have been by far the strongest. Look, he had a very good record as a very fiscally conservative Democrat who had no future in his party because he was against the special interests of his party and wanted to become a Republican, and he would have run a very good race. But look, we had successes across the board. I mean, the 6 congressional seats that we picked up were a record. You have to go back to 1946 to find that we picked up as many. That was more than any other state in the United States. Ohio and Pennsylvania each picked up 5, Illinois 4, and others going down from there. The 9 assembly seats that we picked up, Brian Kolb couldn't be more thrilled. That if in fact we get that 9th, he will have 51 seats. Our stronger minority in the assembly will be players, and of course, getting a majority in the state Senate.
You had a good year, except that you lost 2 of the statewide races that people thought that you most likely could have won, and that would be Harry Wilson for comptroller and Dan Donovan for state attorney general. So what happened there?
But if you take those 10 very Democratic states again, Massachusetts and New York are the most Democratic of them. California, at least, you've got Illinois, Maryland, and Connecticut in between, and other smaller states there. There are 38 statewide races, including 9 governorships, 9 U.S. Senate races, and of those, we won only 2. And the only big one was winning Obama's Senate seat in Illinois, in a much lighter shade of blue state, Illinois, than New York State. And then we won the lieutenant governorship in Vermont. That's all we won of those 38 statewide races in these very, very Democratic states. New York is a very tough state. We're going to have to work very hard to build a party here, but this is the year to build a party from the bottom up, because we won't have the statewide races, the state Senate races, the assembly races, and the congressional races to focus on. We can focus on winning the legislative races, holding on to our county execs, and letting this new base that we have build itself from the bottom up, so that in fact we can get New York State on the right track again.
I don't want to, we're about to run out of time, but I just want to ask you, in terms of rebuilding the party, you've got $150,000 on hand in your campaign committee. It's not a lot of money, and we expected to see a little bit of a staffing shakeup, but we've seen with the departure of 1 person from your staff, your communications director. You've brought in Tony Casal. He's your ED. It seems that there's 2 EDs. Are we going to see more staffing shakeups? Are we going to see more fundraising? How are you going to be building the party at the headquarters on State Street?
Well, Liz, first of all, we raised in these 2 election cycles since I was elected chairman in September 29 of 2009, we've raised $4.5 million that went into the 09 races and the 2010 races. You bet we don't have much money left at this point, because we spent everything we did, and the last $50,000 I had after the Get Out the Vote effort went to Dan Donovan, because I thought that would get him over the top.
In the last 2 days of the election, in the last 2 days.
We went all out in that. So starting in the new year, I've got a number of commitments. We're going to build up our funds again. I think we got a much better base to raise those funds. We have 200 or so people who contributed more than $5,000 apiece. We've got several who contributed $100,000 or more, and we're going to be building, raising money the way we did in the 13 months leading up to the 2010 elections, and we'll be doing that again, and building up the state committee.
And staff.
With respect to the personnel of the state committee, I appreciate your advice, but we had a very effective group working through the elections. Of course, some of them we will lose, because we borrowed some from Minnesota, from Tim Pawlenty. They're going to be going back to him. We borrowed others who are national. Our political director, Dave Polyansky, was terrific, but he came nationally. So we're going to have to replace those. And of course, we're bringing on someone, Tony Casal, who was a 9-term member of the Assembly. He worked very closely with Rapplier from the late 70s through 95. He knows the legislature from the inside out and will be very helpful to us in our messaging in working with the legislature. So we're going to be building up the staff, adjusting it to the new circumstances of the upcoming races that will be local races, but we are focusing on this most important legislative session this budget that's coming up where we have a $10 billion or more deficit that has to be closed, I think the state party is, with its messaging and working with our legislator, is going to be a very important part to solving that in the right way. That is by cutting the spending and not raising taxes.
Okay, well, Chairman, unfortunately we're out of time. I want to thank you for joining us, and I also want to wish you a Happy New Year. Thanks so much.
Happy New Year to you, Liz. Good to talk to you.
Coming up, you'll hear my interview with Ed Cox's Democratic counterpart, Jay Jacobs. He chairs both the state and Nassau County Democratic parties, and he's standing by. He'll be joining me after a quick break. Please stay with us.